Peter Cardwell is with us, looking over Rachel Reeves' big giveaway. There are some losers as well, Peter, which we'll come on to in a second, but not everybody is trousering the cash today.
That's right, and I think that there will be a number of different departments not particularly happy. Defence have done well, of course. Health, she hasn't really mentioned. Oh no, hold on. Funding increased by 3% a year in real terms. That's just come through in the last couple of minutes there. Yeah. An extra 29 billion per year in the day-to-day running of the health service. But yes, there will, of course, a lot of this will be working out who's not going to be happy. The Home Office, I think, quite a number of senior police officers have raised the spectre, saying we don't have enough money to do what you want us to do. It'll be really interesting. The announcements so far on Home Affairs have been on prisons, which is Ministry of Justice, and things like asylum. It'll be really interesting to see if the police and senior leaders like Sir Mark Rowley, the Metropolitan Police Chief, who have said that they are worried about having enough money to do what the government is asking them to do.
We spoke to a senior officer just a couple of days ago on this very point, really worried. We know that there were certainly some rumblings coming of a bit of a battle between the Home Office and the Treasury. That's not in itself unusual. That's what it's all about, trying to get some cash. Suggestion, though, that Yvette Cooper might have lost out on something.
Yeah, I think so. On wasted, certainly she won't be happy with the policing budget. Interesting one on wasted money as well. Rachel Reeves says, I will be ruthless in calling out wasted money. That is an absolute response to what Reform are doing on their Doge review and a lot of their different councils talking about national government as well. Rachel Reeves has said for the first time in 18 years this government has run a zero-based review, a line-by-line assessment of government spending. I have been relentless in driving out inefficiencies and I will be ruthless in calling out waste, with every penny being reinvested back into public services. That's a lot easier said than done.
Let's get a word on all of this from Jonathan Portis, Professor of Economics at King's College. Jonathan, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon.
There's a lot of billions of pounds floating around in this announcement in the last half hour. Has that big black hole just got bigger?
No, remember, this spending review doesn't actually change the overall totals of either spending or tax. What she's talking about is allocating the money that was already penciled in. So the numbers actually haven't changed from the numbers we saw in the OBR forecast of March earlier this year. So in that sense, the overall numbers haven't changed. What's changed is we now have a lot more detail about where that overall money is being allocated. And as I think you've correctly just said, the big picture here is there's some, the winners, quote unquote, are defence, a big boost to housing, a big boost to infrastructure spending across the board, new nuclear plans, transport in the north and so on. Those are the winners. And then correspondingly, the implicit losers are the departments of the budget whose budgets are not protected. That includes the Home Office, as you just said, policing, some other areas, university, sadly, my own sector, and some others will have done somewhat less well. But for exactly where the pain is going to fall, we'll have to wait for the detail. But that big picture is pretty much as you've just outlined it.
The interesting thing, of course, about politicians, Jonathan, as you know, some would argue politicians were put on this earth to be lampooned and satirised and cartooned and given a sort of public lashing every now and again, verbally speaking. We all get that. But in many respects, in fairness to any chancellor of whatever political colour, it is the world's most impossible job, right?
It's a very difficult job, and she was dealt a very difficult hand. Some of us would have said that a lot of this infrastructure spending that's been announced, a lot of that could have been announced by George Osborne almost, more than 10 years ago, at a time when the government could have borrowed effectively at close to zero interest rates. In other words, it would not have cost us much. Unfortunately, Rachel Reeves, I think it's still the right thing to do to invest in this money, but it's going to cost us, because of that failure to do it 10 years ago, it's going to cost us a lot more because interest rates are a lot higher and borrowing is a lot more expensive now. So I think she is playing a very difficult hand. reasonably well, I would have said.
Just give us your take on the wider sort of economic picture. Everything is interlinked, of course, in the world today, whether it's our relationship with other European countries or on the wider stage with big economies like India, like the United States, etc. I keep hearing, and I don't know what your take is on this, but every time, and of course, nobody should live their life through social media. It is a den of iniquity and you will go mad after just several hours. However, there does seem to be a fairly prevalent and fairly regular take that economically the world, including us, of course, has got 5 or 10 years of real struggles to come, whether you're in Germany, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in the United Kingdom. Do you concur with that, or is that just ultimate pessimism?
I think that's a bit pessimistic. I mean, you know, we are seeing in some ways incredible ways of technological progress at the same time, right? Not just AI, and we have no real idea what the economic impacts of that, but in terms of medical science, quantum computing, and so on, things which have a real potential to make the economy better, but indeed our lives better. I think the threats we face are in some sense largely political, right? We have a president, the president of the largest, leading the largest economy in the world, who is doing his best to take us back to the 1930s, both economically in terms of protection and, frankly, politically in terms of openly moving away from the democratic experiment of the United States. That is a pretty big deal. And of course, the 30s were not a comfortable time for this country, or indeed any country, from either an economic or political perspective. That is really, really dangerous. But I don't think that's it's sort of because of fundamental economic forces. That's because of the current geopolitical situation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are, not just Republicans, but some would say, no, actually, Donald Trump is just moving away from global groupthink. He's doing something slightly different. He's taking on China, playing them at their own game to a degree, and we can see correlations there, of course. He's just doing it in an unconventional fashion. Watch this space, and America will grow like you've never seen, Jonathan.
I mean, I think that there was a perfectly reasonable argument for regarding China as a competitor as well as a cooperator, and using the US's economic power in that respect. That does not explain declaring economic war on Canada, threatening to invade Greenland, impose it, effectively cancelling the US-Mexico-Canada free trade agreement, which Donald Trump himself renegotiated in 2017. So I think attempting to sort of explain this as some sort of rational economic strategy, much as economists like me would like to, we find that very difficult indeed.
In terms of what's happening here then, just final point, Jonathan, we were discussing earlier the heady days of the mid-90s when Blair came into Downing Street. We remember it well, shaking all of those hands as he was walking up that most famous street on the planet. Blur playing in the background. Things Can Only Get Better by D-Ream playing on the other I mean, these were heady times. Everyone was having it off royally, financially speaking, of course. And life was good. There was a sense of real optimism. When are we going to get that again?
I think we are sadly a long way from that. And I would not presume to predict that we will go back to that. Things changed a lot in 2008,
Yep.
The global financial crisis and the aftermath, and we've struggled to recover from that. I think that some of the things the government has announced today should improve the UK's economic prospects, and indeed, living standards for ordinary people. You just mentioned social housing. That is really important. Housing is the main challenge facing millions and millions of families. So things can get better, but it's not going to be easy.
Jonathan, thank you for your time, sir. Really appreciate that. Professor Jonathan Portis from King's College with us with his take on that big spending review still going on in Parliament. I think we're now getting the opposition response. Peter, just briefly.
Yes, Sir Mel Stride, who is the Shadow Chancellor, ridiculing, saying it's borrow, borrow, borrow. He's also called Rachel Reeves the tinfoil Chancellor, saying that she's fiddled her fiscal rules, and she is a tinfoil Chancellor because she's flimsy and ready to fold under pressure to spend more money. So those are the lines that he will want to get out there.
Could have been the cardboard box chancellor on that basis.
Yes, although less of a good hat, which obviously keeps away all the mind control.
And some
vibes.
cardboard boxes are quite tough, so it might have been the wrong analogy.
Unless they get, exactly. Unless they get wet sitting on your doorstep. Yeah.
Peter Cardwell stays with us for a bit. We're going to look at social housing a little bit more as well. What does it mean for you? The spending review. She's dishing out the cash. Has she handed it to all the right places? Howard Cox with us later. What does it mean for motorists and the like? Are we going to get any sort of sense? It's not a budget, remember, but we can extrapolate some things from this in terms of direction of travel. And in terms of social housing, I'm going to throw that specific question in because I think this is going to be, I think there's two things that are going to be big debates over the next 5 years. One, are smartphones for under 16s. That's a separate issue. But number two, social housing is going to be housing in general, and who gets it, and what do you do with 40,000 people currently stuffed into hotels? Lines are open on that. If you've been on the social housing list, or one of your kids or grandchildren are there, how's that going? You hear stories of people who've been there for 10 years, for goodness sake.